a little brief introduction, and yeah, the parents of the fifth graders don't have to stick around. No one has to stick around, actually, but I hope some of you will, so that we can talk to you a little bit about crime in District 7 and what we can do to prevent it. And I wanted to start by telling you that there are lots and lots of great topics in the city to discuss, but tonight, because we have the privilege of having Chief Burbank here with us, we're just going to focus on crime and how we can prevent it. And there's lots and lots of other things, and we'll probably do some more of these meetings, and please feel free to contact me. I would tell you that the best way to contact me is via email. If you call me, I will hear your phone call, but it'll take me longer to get back to you than if you email me. And the council office has a fantastic staff who are experts on everything about the city. So I don't know something, which is frequent. I rely on the help of our council staff, and I will have them get an answer to you, and they're usually pretty quick at getting an answer and giving you a response to the things that you want to know. I thought I'd also tell you just a little bit about District 7, the boundaries. Really kind of interesting. From Foothill Boulevard all the way down to 5th East is the rough east-west boundary, and north-south is 21st South, right here to 17th East, then north on 17th East to 17th South, down 17th South to 7th East, then south on 7th East to 21st, west on 21st to 5th East, and then out 5th East. As far as the southern boundary goes, it's the southern edge of the city. And the only way to know where that boundary is, if you don't have a map, is to drive it on garbage day. And if you see a black garbage can, it's a county can. If you see a green one, it's a city can. And like on Imperial, you drive halfway down and it's green cans, and then all of a sudden they're black cans on the other side of the street. And we have this one little gerrymandered area, Brickyard, so we can get the taxes from them. So that's how that works. I also wanted to tell you that you are always welcome to come to council meetings. And I've been doing this now for about 16 months, and I had someone say to me, it worries me when I go to council meetings that it seems like everything's been predetermined, that you vote and it moves and it's done. Well, that's because we have had an endless work session, probably with lots and lots of discussion over many weeks, where we've discussed it. So we kind of fine-tuned it, so by the time we get to our formal meeting, we are making a decision. If you come to the formal meeting, you are welcome to speak for 2 minutes on any topic. There are specific topics, and you can address those, or you can come and you can address just a general topic during the general comment period, and we are delighted to have you come. If you really want to see the council at work, come to see us during our work session, and they traditionally have been at 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoons. However, as of this past week, we decided we would move them to 1 o'clock so that maybe we can go home before 10 o'clock a little more often, because we end up covering lots of material. Or you can tune in on channel 17, or you can grab it on the internet and watch it. I would have to tell you that if you have problems with sleeping, you might want to tune in to channel 17, just gently be lulled off to sleep. It works pretty well. I try really hard not to be asleep when I'm at the meetings, but I worry. I think people are watching me on TV. What if I doze off? I try not to. Finally, I want you to know, if you don't know, that the Sugar House Community Council meets every month, the first Wednesday of every month at the Sprague Library at 7 o'clock. And they talk about all the things that are going on in District 7 and in the Sugar House area. So always feel free to do that, and of course they're also on the web. So that just gives you kind of a little overview. And now I want to take a minute and introduce Chief Burbank. Chief Burbank has been a member of the Salt Lake City Police Force since 1991, and he's been the Chief of Police since 2006. And during the time he has been the Chief, he has won nationwide recognition as well as statewide recognition for his ability to lead the police department in a positive way, and for his ability to work well with the community and to promote collegiality and cooperative work. And I found him to be great to work with and very responsive to any of the concerns I have had for our district. He has a degree in sociology from the University of Utah, and he has so many accolades that would be here all night if I told him I'd embarrass him besides. So I really appreciate his willingness to come. And as I said, tonight we want to focus primarily on crime and crime prevention. We want this to be very interactive and to have you all have a chance to ask him questions. Feel free, if you have had an experience with crime, to share that with him, and he will be able to respond and tell you how the police department is doing that. And I'm going to start us off by asking you to respond to 2 questions. The first one is, what can we do to have a greater police presence in District 7? Is there anything that can be done, whether it's cruisers or bike patrols or whatever? Because we know when people see police, crimes go down. And I regularly hear the only police I ever see are the ones giving tickets in the gully right up here. And happily I've managed to see them in time. But so if you would respond to that, and if you would also respond to what we can do as a community to help deter crime. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. And we have staff here who will be happy to bring you a microphone if you have a question. So do you want to grab that mic, Chief?
I can grab that one, sure.
And I'll hand this to Libby. Thanks. And I'll answer any questions that I can too.
Okay, so I will answer those first 2 questions, but let you know that my intent is to strictly answer questions. As you will find, and my staff will certainly point out, I have the ability to talk for an hour or longer if necessary, but I would much rather answer your questions and hopefully get to some solutions. So the first thing, when we talk about police presence, I think it's very important because there's a lot of misunderstanding about how we divide police officers up. So I'm going to ask a few questions. Are there more police officers on the west side of Salt Lake City or on the east side of Salt Lake City?
West side.
Why do you think the west side?
Well, there are some troublemakers on the west side.
Okay, so this is kind of logical, right? You put police officers where you think problems are going to be. So did someone say east side? Did I get an east side from this, or? No. Okay, so you think more on the east side. Why would you think more would be on the east side?
I think there's higher birth rate crimes on the east side.
Okay, that is very interesting. So what you're saying is that a lot of crime drives where we locate police officers, and there's probably no question about that. But one of the things that I think is very important, what we try and do is we try and even out the police officers throughout the city. Because we operate on a very important principle, and the idea is if the police officers are constantly busy running call to call, right, they're not doing proactive work that hopefully prevents crime from occurring. And I believe that our goal should be to prevent crime from occurring. We are a flawed system when we accept a level of crime in our neighborhoods, when we accept, especially violent crime, in our communities, when we allow that to take place and the police are simply responding after the fact. If that's what our expectation is for policing in our city, well then we ought to do just like Verizon or any other large call center does. We'll put all the police officers and they don't need to carry guns. Let me see if that other one works better. Can I trade for you? Sorry. That one keeps going out on me. Is that a little, that sounds a little better. But, and we just answer calls and say, here's your case number, call your insurance company. But that's not the United States that I want to live in, and it's certainly not the city. The idea is that we somehow prevent crime from occurring. And what we have demonstrated over the last, well, my career has been about 25, 26 years now, but what we have demonstrated is we have incarcerated people in the United States at a higher rate than any other civilized nation. We have more violent crime. In fact, 450 people every single day in the United States lose their lives to violence. That's not traffic accidents, that is a violent act. 450 people a day is a staggering number. And it is an amount that, why are we tolerant of that? Like, why are we not standing up and saying, okay, there's a problem, there's an issue, how do we change this? So getting back to Salt Lake City, so what we try and do is we try and balance out the police officers. So 60% of their time is committed time. That's 60% of their time that they take going to lunch, answering calls that come into the dispatch center, getting gas in their cars, doing everything that they need to do in essence. And then 40% of their time is spent actually proactively doing something. And that something can be a lot of different things. I think a lot of people think that we write tickets for revenue. I do not do enforcement for revenue. In fact, this is a little ongoing argument, not with Lisa, but with the city council and councils of the past. right? We don't write parking tickets. I want to say that right up front. The police department does not write parking tickets. That's a whole different, but they've tried for years and years to have us do that. But the city views that as a revenue generating source, and I don't think we should use police officers to generate revenue. So the way we write tickets, and mostly when you see the motorcycle officers, right, and in your neighborhood you've identified, certainly don't speed in front of Highland High here, right? You will get caught 9 times out of 10. But we write tickets, or we put our motor squad, who is primarily responsible for writing the tickets, to where people call and complain. Foothill Boulevard, do not speed along Foothill, especially not in the mornings, right? Because we get constant calls for service, and that's where we deploy our motorcycle officers. The majority of the traffic enforcement that we do is driven by calls from the community saying, hey, there's a problem here. We also do, you'll see some of the speed boards that go up around. They actually, not only do they indicate what speed you're going, they track the number of cars that comes through, the hours of the day, what the average speed is, and everything else. And when we identify areas where the speed is excessive, or we have a lot of accidents, then we'll do some enforcement there as well. We also, just in defense of my motorcycle unit, they pay particular attention to school zones. Because there is a correlation between lots of kids running in the road and unfortunately traffic accidents, tragic traffic accidents that occur. So that is what drives most of our motorcycle enforcement. But when you're talking about how do we respond for calls for service, it is split up so that in the areas of the city that have fewer calls for service, that an officer is assigned. And we'll do some visual. So if you imagine the piano top is the city of Salt Lake. Well, downtown, there's a lot of calls for service. In fact, that's the busiest area of the city, is in the downtown area. And in any large city in the nation, any large city in the world, the population center is where everything happens as far as criminal activity. So we put that in the center. Now, one police officer may be assigned there, because that's a busy area, and it's small. So as you get to outlying areas, let's say out by the airport, right? As you go past the airport, you have the industrial, that doesn't mean that nothing goes on out there, but not as at high a rate as what happens in downtown Salt Lake. So now the area out by the airport may be much larger. It still has an officer assigned to it, but that area is a larger area. They have a larger area of responsibility. So in some of the neighborhoods up in this area, you can look and you can say, all right, where's all the business in this section of the city? That's in and around kind of the downtown area of Sugar House, right? When you look at Shopko, the parking lots in and around there, the liquor store, Fairmont Park, those are the areas that, again, we have a little more happening. So the areas in those, the officer responsibility is a little smaller. In the areas where there's less going on, they have more area. So when a call comes in for service, let's say it's out in this area. The dispatcher looks at her screen and she says, okay, who's the officer out there and are they busy? She sends the nearest officer, because they're all AVL, so you can look on a screen and see where everybody is. She sends that police car. So hopefully, right, call goes down in this area, you have a police officer available, he's responsible for going to that call. Now, if it is a call that involves an in-progress crime, right? If it's a call that involves intoxicated people and some of those other things, we don't send one officer, we send 2 officers. So if at that particular time you have 2 officers assigned in the area, then it would be those 2 officers. Otherwise, dispatcher looks and says, where's the next closest officer to that call from a different area, and brings them in there to handle the call for service. And then that's how it goes. And it works really well until it gets busy. Friday night in the summertime. Right? Monday morning on a snowy day. That's a nightmare sometimes. Those are the times that we start to get busy because we get lots of calls for service. And so we prioritize those calls. So calls that involve people, right, that are in progress, so a robbery, that's where somebody is taking something from somebody by force or fear. Homicides, those types of things that involve people are the highest priority calls for service and in progress. Right? And then we go down the list and we prioritize everything. So what we do is we always send, so as calls come in on a busy night, if they are a higher priority level of call for service, those are the ones that get officers quicker. And unfortunately, if you happen to be the victim of a burglary, that the suspect's not there, right? You call up and you say, I came home, the TV's gone, the front door is open, somebody's taken my TV. And we say, okay. On a normal day where you have plenty of police officers, you send a police officer and they take care of that in a very timely fashion. If that happens to be on a Friday night in July and it's very busy, you may wait a couple hours. But that is because they are responding to other calls where people are involved and there's more immediate attention. And you would all want that exact same attention. Right? I mean, it is just the way we have to do business. I would love to say that we'll get to that point where we always have enough police officers no matter what. Well, that's not the case. But interesting, everyone thinks there's a correlation between police officers and crime. And we all used to think that. In fact, police chiefs across the nation for years and years were very good at saying, you give me more police officers and I'll make crime go down. In the 90s, crime was at an all-time high. Violent crime, gang crime, all-time high. We had more police officers than ever in the history of the country. Well, the last 7, 8 years, we saw very difficult economic times. For one of the first times in history, they started to do away with police officer jobs. Those are the hardest things for council members and political entities to cut. Police officers and firefighters don't go over real well. So you look at everything else. But during this time, so 3 years ago in the United States, there were 40,000 fewer police officer positions. Those are vacant positions that were filled the year before, and crime continues to decline. We have many fewer officers than we did in the 90s. Cities like the city of Houston, right, are now at about 5,000 police officers, I think, the last time. At one point, they were up close to 10,000 police officers. But crime's gone down in the city of Houston. And violent crime has gone down. Now, I would love to say, right, that the reason crime has gone down in the nation is because of all the enlightened police leadership that we have in the United States. Now, you've all seen a lot of TV lately and how the police are being portrayed, and there's not a lot of enlightened police leadership. In fact, we've got a lot of problems, and we can talk about that later. But what I think is we have gotten better at communicating with the public. Because the reason crime goes down is we will never have enough police officers to stand on every corner to make sure that crime doesn't occur. Right now, none of you are going to commit a crime with, there's several of us sitting in this office, but even if I was alone, right, odds are pretty good you're not going to decide now is the time to rob the person sitting next to you. Right? But that doesn't mean that down the street, in the next, or down the hall in the next classroom, that that's any more secure because I'm here. In fact, they don't even know I'm here. And the same thing occurs. You can have an officer standing on the street corner, and at the very next corner, a crime's occurring. Well, they have no idea, right? And it's not always a matter of presence. And nor, right, is it realistic or feasibly economical to think that we're going to put a police officer everywhere that crime might occur. But what we do have is we have a number and more than enough good people living in our neighborhoods who, if they're willing to stand up and say, nope, I'm not going to allow this to happen, I'm going to become involved, I'm going to call the police, and I'm going to be a good witness to this crime and make sure that it doesn't happen, right? Or do all I can to prevent it. That is how we prevent crime. And we have had more people interject themselves into our business than ever before. The other thing is cell phones, right? We've seen police officers on cell phones a million times lately. Right? The same thing works for the criminals. Right? We are documenting. People are more aware and taking more involvement and that is how we prevent crime. And that's why I think crime's gone down. Even in light of, right? You would say hard economic times. Well, crime should be going up. Right? Fewer police officers. Crime should be going up. But we've seen the opposite. So we're headed in the right direction. Now, I'm always asked, are there enough police officers in Salt Lake City? Right? And especially some of you are probably wondering, and I'll get to you up there, that because we reorganized the downtown area and we put more police officers stationary in the downtown area, but we didn't draw them from anywhere else. Those were the officers that were already there working. What we did is we just brought them under one chain of command and said, you stay here, right? And try and keep them there. That doesn't mean they stay constantly. So if a call for service comes out in Sugar House and there's not an available police officer, then they would pull from that area just like we would pull from Sugar House to go downtown or any other time. But what the idea behind that was, is that we would have officers under one chain of command that could focus on those specific crimes downtown and not constantly pull people out of all the neighborhoods surrounding the entire downtown area. So what happens is, we are not pulling the officers out of the Sugar House area, out of Rose Park, out of Glendale, out of the Industrial Center, because they are not needed downtown. And so they're able to handle the calls and deal more proactively and spend more time preventing crime. Now that doesn't mean that it doesn't get busy, and it doesn't mean that some of you haven't waited, but we will always look and say, all right, why did you wait for this? And see what the reason is behind it. It's because officers are slow, it's because we're inappropriately deployed, well then we'll constantly make changes. One of the things that, again, is very hard on political entities is policing is a very fluid activity. So if I have drug activity that's occurring in a neighborhood, I don't just leave that for the people who are already working there. I send more resources there. Yeah, and we may drive it somewhere else, and then we float the resources elsewhere, and we do that constantly in the city as things come up in order to address it. So it's not a neat business, it flows around quite a bit. Now, I think I've talked long enough, more or less answered your question. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I just want to know about the crime in our district.
Okay.
What's the main crime? What's driving the calls that are coming in? And what's the main problem? Is it that we have some meth houses? Is it that we have some drug houses, some specific bad spots that are happening? I mean, I know what's going on in my 4 blocks right there, but that's just one section of the district. And as far as the whole district, and if that's the case, if you know what's going on in one place and you're being proactive, how is it that you're being proactive with certain things that you know that's going on there on a daily basis?
Okay. So one of the questions is, not a question, but one of the comments was meth houses. Right? A few years ago, we cracked down on the precursor chemicals for meth. Very few people manufacture meth anymore, which is a nice thing. It's not Salt Lake City, the state of Utah let out, it's probably, I'd say 2004, 2005. We had 500 and something meth production homes or facilities going on in the state. We've dropped that down to a handful, a few labs. And so you look and you say, well, that's great. That is great, right? Because it's a very dangerous process. But what we've done is it became more economically feasible, and they can make lots more money if they just manufacture it across the border and then ship it into the United States, including Utah. And so most of the meth now comes from across the border as opposed to being homegrown. The biggest problem that we have in the city, right, and in any neighborhood in our city, is our addiction to heroin right now. And that drives all the crime. Not all, but a good portion of it. And let me give you some examples.
What percentage?
Well, so if you look at our bank robberies, right, we catch the majority of bank robbers. Because bank robbery is not a very lucrative crime if you're a criminal, with all the surveillance. So we get about 90% of the bank robbers. So last year, the FBI and the police department did a study of the bank robberies that occurred. 88% of those individuals that we caught robbing banks were heroin addicts. 88%. Now, interestingly enough, we've created the heroin addiction. It used to be, early in my career, it was very difficult to find heroin. In fact, you would call the rookies up and say, hey, we found some heroin, come look at it, this is what it looks like. It was a drug that had gone away for the most part. What we saw, especially in the state of Utah, a lot of it has to do with our culture and how we live, we saw a tremendous increase in prescription medication abuse, primarily opiate, Oxycontin, oxycodone, and we said, oh, wait a minute. In fact, 4 years ago, deaths from prescription overdoses associated with misuse, right? Not overdoses as prescribed, but misuse, abuse, outpaced traffic accident deaths, and has in the nation. And so what happened is we all said, oh, wait a minute, there's a problem. We talked to doctors. We told all of you, get it out of your medicine cabinet, prescribe less, don't leave it around. In fact, we drove the price of Oxy up to $80 a tablet on the street. You can hit heroin for $10. So now when you can't, the source dries up, you turn to heroin. Well, the nice thing about prescription medication is it's timed release, it's designed to be in your body and everything else, so it's a very steady, sustained high. Well, heroin goes like this, depending on the quality, the cut, and everything else that comes with it. So now you're hitting heroin 4 or 5 times a day in order to maintain that same high, and you find yourself, boy, I'm addicted, I gotta do something, and so you turn to passing a note to a bank teller that says, got a bomb, give me some money. And so that is driving a lot. It drives car prowls, which are prevalent in your area. It drives residential burglaries, which, by the way, we looked at residential burglaries not too long ago. Those are where somebody takes something from your home, right? Oftentimes in this neighborhood, it's from your garage. The majority of the time, the garage is left open. Now, when we talk about security, and this is one of the things that I think is very important, I don't want to live paranoid in my life. So every decision that we make in life involves risk. Right? If I walk out the door, I don't hide, and I want to run across 21st South in the middle of the street, right? I'm evaluating the risk I'm taking when I do that. Right? Weigh it against the time that it's going to take me to walk up the street to the intersection, wait that however many seconds for the light and cross that way. Right? That's how I reduce my risk. So, yes, it's convenient to leave your garage door open, especially when you're warming your car up in the morning. But I'll tell you what, the majority of our stolen cars are cars that are left turned on with keys running in it. It's also cooler, right? Because you close the garage door, it heats up. Well, somebody drives by and they're just looking, and they look in and they see the snowblower, they see the skis or the bike or whatever it is, look around, nobody's coming, run, take it, and leave. Now, I am never going to excuse that behavior, right? That's criminal behavior. And yes, I would love to catch those people. And yes, they should be held accountable for their actions. And we should be able to say that that never happens. But we need to all work to reduce our exposure to risk just a little bit. Right? Pay attention to who your neighbors are. When you're leaving town, right? Let your neighbors know, a neighbor that you can trust, right? I'm leaving town. Leave lights on when you leave your house. Leave a radio on, or the TV. Now TVs are a little more expensive, but leave some noise on. Make it look like somebody's home. For $2.95, you go to Home Depot, you can buy those little things, the timers, you can plug your lights in, and I mean, you can spend a lot more money and get the very sophisticated ones, but you get a cheap one, so the lights come on and off like somebody's home. Right? Pay the neighbor kid $10 while you're on vacation for a week. Please pick up our newspaper. Or better yet, call and cancel your newspaper for the time. Stop your mail delivery. People pay attention to these things. And when they're walking down the street, and it is simple as that, you walk down the street, you look. There's 4 newspapers in front of that house. Obviously nobody's home. You look around, nobody's around. Or maybe I'll come back in an hour. We invite some of this, again, by risk. So we want to try and reduce our risk without being paranoid. And so that's part of what goes into it. So residential burglaries are a big thing. You have, as far as areas, right? The crime is very fluid. And this is something that I am extremely sympathetic to, right? If this is the neighborhood over here on this side of the room, and they've all lived here for 20-something years and never experienced crime ever, right? Nothing's ever gone on in the neighborhood. And one Friday, this gentleman's house gets robbed. Her backyard, somebody breaks into the yard and steals the bicycle. Somebody takes the dog out of this yard. How do they feel about crime and the police? We got a problem, right? Well, now I, very insensitively, say, well, I'm looking at the entire city, right? Well, last year, those 3 burglaries were over here. Now they're over here. My numbers aren't any different. Right? I had 3. In fact, you know what? Last year I had 10 over here. Now I only had 3 this year. But do these people care about that statistic? All they know is there is a problem on their street. And what do they tell their neighbors? What do they call Lisa up and say? We've got a problem on this street. I've lived here for 20 years and never had a problem. And now I got burglarized. The neighbors down the street got their cars stolen and everything. It may be the exact same person or people. And it may be a one-time incident. But I'll tell you what, if that's my street, I'm kind of upset by that. And so this is part of the insensitivity that comes with statistics and everything else that we get into. And partly what I try and press upon police officers, as well as the community, right? That is not acceptable. I don't care if burglaries have gone up 100% or down 10,000%. If you happen to be the victim of that crime, that is, you don't care about statistics. That's one crime too many. And the same thing absolutely applies to violent crime. Right? Where do they sell drugs in the city? Pioneer Park. I want to know how you know that. Oh, okay, all right, we'll buy that.
Friend of mine.
So is that because Pioneer Park is a lovely place to sell drugs? It's got some nice trees, you're shaded as you deal your dope out.
My neighbor's house.
Well, your neighbor's house, okay? That takes place as well. Well, I'll come back to you because we got to address your neighbor's house. But what happens, right, is the reason they're in Pioneer Park is, one, that's where the homeless people are. Now, there are some people who find themselves in homelessness because of drug and alcohol addictions. Absolutely. But most of the time they can't afford to buy the drugs. Right? That's a complicated issue. So what happens when we go in, we pretend to buy drugs. We send officers in undercover. We buy drugs, we arrest the person, we take them away. And then we put on some nice clothes and pretend to be drug dealers. And we arrest those people who come and try and buy drugs from us. And who do you think we arrest? All of your neighbors. And all of my neighbors.
The whole valley.
Police officers, attorneys, doctors, school teachers, students, people of means, people who are poor, people of color. It doesn't matter. Everybody has the same drug problems and issues. But why it focuses there is because for years and years we said that's where the homeless people hang out. If I take that same activity, right, and this gentleman's got a problem with his neighbors because he thinks they're selling drugs. That activity gets noticed. Somebody stands on your street corner in your neighborhood and sees 25 individuals in a 2-hour period and hands them something and they give them money. How many calls are you going to make to the police department? That same activity goes on in and around that area and we don't notice it. In fact, if you're a homeless person, you don't call the police. Because one, the police have constantly moved you along for loitering, urinating in public, trespassing, all these other things. And so you've got warrants, so you don't want the police to interact with you. They'll take you to jail for the night. You don't want to get in that business. And in fact, she's got an addiction, so I'm the drug dealer. I make her hold my drugs, because if the cops stop me, they take it all away and I lose lots of money. If I only hold a few pieces, and she holds the rest, the cops get me, I just lose a little bit. And I give her a taste because she's got an addiction, but you steal from me, I'm going to kill you. Right? Now, does she call the police? No. She doesn't. And then I make someone else hold my money, right? Because I don't want to lose my wallet of cash. And you better not steal my money. You know what's going to happen to you if you steal my money. And so it perpetuates this problem. And the reason it perpetuates the problem is because nobody contacts the police and works with us and cooperates and solves this problem for the community. And when we do that in our neighborhoods, when we say, okay, it's not happening to me, I'm not going to worry about it, I'm not going to report, I'm not going to call about the suspicious car or whatever it may be, I'm upset because last time I called, it took the cops 2 hours to get here, so I'm not going to call this time, well then it thrives. Right? When you get your car broken into, I promise you, there's not much we're going to do about it. I would love to say I'm going to solve that crime for you. Chances are pretty good I'm not. That is a fact of life.
So what's the benefit?
But if you call me, I'm getting there. Man.
You can take questions.
All right. If you call, then we track that, and that goes into the statistics that allow us to put more officers in the area, put more resources, change how we do business, change the hours that we do business, and all those types of things. So if you believe that your neighbors are selling drugs, and we know it is, and the challenge is when somebody calls and says, I'm sure my neighbors are selling drugs, right? We send undercover officers. They try and buy drugs. If they won't sell to them, right, I can't generate a warrant or anything to do something further. We have to look at something else. We send officers in uniform and say, hey, we think you're selling drugs, knock it off. Right? There's a whole bunch of different ways that we do it, but we do follow up on those. The hard thing is some of those get referred to the DEA because we work cooperatively with them. It becomes 3-month investigation. I hate those, right? Because yeah, maybe they're building a really great federal case, but that doesn't solve the problem that I've got a drug dealer in my neighborhood for however many months. Yes, ma'am.
Well, first of all, the drug deals by my house are car to car. You know, one pulls up, the buyer pulls up behind them and they do their deal in the car. They don't do it in a house. So that's the first comment. But the other is, when I first moved into my house, police cruisers used to drive by every so often. I live right on 11th East. I never see a police car driving by anymore. So where are they?
Well, I will tell you this, right? So one, yes, there's more car-to-car activity because it's now the way to avoid the cops getting in your business. It becomes mobile, it's a little harder. Take down the license plate, call us and think of what I can see, or just report. I mean, say, hey, I'd just like to let you know. Goes to the narcotics officers, they start to match those things up and look for those types of cars. Now, as far as the number of police officers, there are more police officers in the city of Salt Lake than ever in the history of the police department. In fact, over the last few years, we've increased, because of the generosity of the city council, we have added some federal grant positions, and so we have more police officers. And so whether or not they are specifically on your street or not, that is a very hard one for me to address, because we deploy the same number of police officers. In fact, we deploy more police officers. Right? We do things differently, we change it, we try and mix up where we are and all those types of things, so it becomes, at least some coordinated effort to identify what's going on. And so we can specifically look at that. One of the nice things that I've got going now for me is every single one of my cars has what's called AVL in it. It's got a computer in there. I know where that car is 24 hours a day, what time it was there, and how fast it was driving down your street. So we can start to identify where we were specifically looking for some of these things. Now, if there's nothing going on your neighborhood and officers are viewing your street as quiet, which as you described, it doesn't sound like it's quiet, you've got some problems or issues, but that may drive whether or not an officer goes on that street.
Well, 11th East isn't a quiet street anymore.
No, I mean, it's not a quiet street, but one of the fortunate,
Just 1 second. It'd be great if you'll speak into the mic because we're recording this so you can watch yourself on Channel 17 later. So grab the mic so that everybody can hear your question.
And they want to hear somebody besides me on Channel 17 every once in a while. So there's a lot of different things that we can do to kind of address that. But I will tell you, there's not fewer officers, there's actually more officers working. Our calls for service have gone down. Crime has gone down. Everything associated with our activity has gone down except the number of police officers. And it's a question I ask all the time of my staff. In fact, there's a couple of my deputy chiefs in the room. Right? Crime's down. We have more police officers. What are they doing with that work? And why do they come to me and say, we are too busy? Well, no, you should have more free time. Please.
Hi, yes, I live in the Sugar House area, and thank you, Lisa, for the meeting. Officer Lowe just stepped up, but he's our community officer, and he's been particularly helpful with our neighborhood, some issues we've had. Can you explain the cycle? We have a lot of them, like they switch pretty often, and I'm just curious at that, because we'll build a relationship with someone and they move on, and I just am curious about that, because it's a great resource. I think people should know about it, and again, there's different skill sets they have. Officer Lowe's great, so I'm just curious about that.
Okay, so for years and years, community policing, and this was the mistake that law enforcement made early in the 90s, right? That's when community policing became the big buzzword. You want officers to talk to the community. So everyone got a small squad of people and said, for Salt Lake City it was 5 people. For Los Angeles it was 150 people. They're the friendly officers and the rest of you are thugs and do business as you always do, right? Well, that's a disservice to police and that's a disservice to the community. No, we want all officers to be community officers who can work and solve problems. So what I tried to do is a number of years ago, so those individuals are candidates for promotion within the police department. And I believe that the number one thing that they should be able to do is work with the community in order to solve problems if they're going to be a leader in the organization. So I put them in what's called our CIU, and they become your neighborhood officer. And then they are promoted out of there when they're successful. And they are not promoted out of there when they are unsuccessful in the neighborhood. So it becomes a very good gauge for me to decide whether or not I want somebody to be a supervisor in the police department. So unfortunately, a few years ago, we went through a cycle where they were in there for 1.5 to 2 years, which is too long. I don't want to get them moving. Well, occasionally, we get a lot of retirements. Because in the early 90s, in the late 80s, we had lots of police officers hired on federal grants. Well, we have a 20-year retirement system. And so everyone does 20 years, and then they do maybe a few more, and then they decide to retire. Well, when you have 6 retire in a year, that's 6 sergeants that I'm promoting in that year. That turns over that unit almost completely. And so there's some risk-reward as far as the police chief goes. So one of the things that we're trying to do, and you may have seen that, maybe you haven't had a meeting yet, I now assign, not only do you have a community officer who will be there during their time that they're in there, but my deputy chiefs now take a turn every week as the duty chief, right? And their job is to go to the community meetings and be the consistency, to make sure that they are there for you to follow up and solve the problems that you have as some of those officers change and cycle. Because I still think it's important for those officers to have the experience of dealing with you. But what, from a positive standpoint, right, what used to be 6 officers or 7 officers that did that work for 4 or 5 years before they moved on, right? Now imagine, I have 450 police officers, so over time, how much impact am I having on an organization? If I'm now turning those 6 officers or 7 officers over every year, I'm now putting more people, giving them the experience of solving problems in the community, who then go out and influence all the young people that we're hiring to be better police officers and community officers. That's how I think we're more effective. So it's a positive program, but it does have some impact on you. Please.
Dennis, I live in Ramona, 11 East. And I had my car broken into when I called it in, and I had a motor scooter stolen. And, you know, I don't trust people. The element of trust is much greater here in Salt Lake City because people are more law-abiding, in my opinion.
I agree with you.
You may differ, but you know.
No, I agree with you. That's why I'm here.
Yeah, your neighbors are all real nice and nobody steals that, but that's when we let up our guard, you know, because people are so law-abiding around here. But there's maybe other places there's 5%, there's probably 3% here. I don't know, you know the statistics. But what I want to ask is, how about the bicycle police, like in Fairmount Park? Is that being effective? Is that more effective than a cruiser, than an officer in a cruiser? All encapsulated, you know? Can't they see a little bit more? I mean, how effective is the bicycle policeman, like in Fairmount Park?
Okay. So first let me say I'm sorry that you were a victim of crime.
What?
I'm sorry that you were victimized.
Yeah, well, I called
Because I take that very personally.
Yeah.
Truly I do. Right? My expectation is that we don't have any crime. I would love to say there's no crime in Salt Lake City. Now that's a lofty goal that's never going to happen. But I do take it very personally, and I apologize that that happened to you. Bicycle patrols. Bicycles are really great. In fact, I was the bicycle sergeant for a number of years in my career. Because they put you at eye level with the community, you have the ability to talk and do all kinds of neat things. The drawback of a bicycle officer, right? They are less visible and they cover far less area. Now, some of the guys who are out there riding their bikes all the time are going to say, no, Chief, I can cover just as much as you can in a car. I'm sorry, you can't. Right? None of them are riding 35 miles an hour in order to go somewhere. And so it starts to limit some of our response capability. So it's very effective for smaller areas and more urban city type of areas. So we do some of the park patrol, we do some of those other things. And so it just depends on the season of the year and, again, what kind of response we need to have. Because the more that I expect officers to travel further distances, right, or get to things, the other disadvantage of the bicycle is when you arrest somebody, what do you do with them? It's a big challenge, right? So now what I do, so I'm an officer, I arrest you for whatever crime, I have to take you to jail, but I'm on my bike. So I call somebody else. So now I'm tying up 2 police officers in order to make this arrest, where if I were alone, I put you in my police car, drive you to jail. So again, there's trade-offs. And so we evaluate. Absolutely, it's nice to have the bicycle officers. It is a very good way to interact with the public and the scene. It's a good way to kind of sneak up on things, because if you're the criminal, it's harder to see, just like it's harder to see in the public. So again, trade-offs. I mean, it's something we're not abandoning. It's a good program. It's one that I enjoy, but it again has some drawbacks. Where are we at?
I just wanted to make a comment about the level of trust in Salt Lake City, which is huge. I'm originally from New York, recently. It astounds me that people here leave their lives in their cars. They leave computers, they leave wallets. It's incredible that they leave on their porches baby carriages. And nothing happens to them a lot of times. A lot of times it does. So I'd just like to reiterate the comment that you have to be more on your guard. Don't do stupid stuff and ask for trouble.
Thank you. I was very genuine in my comment of why I live here. I mean, I've got lots of job offers around the country to go do, but I like Salt Lake City. I like policing in Salt Lake City. I like the interaction and the trust of this community. But it is a challenge. So we do catch people occasionally that are doing car pranks. For a while we had a ring of, there's 5 or 6, and they were all kind of young people. Every time there was a jazz game, they were breaking into cars. We ended up catching these people and took a van full of stuff they had stolen out of cars. Now imagine going to the jazz game and taking your big screen and leaving it in the back seat. Computers, Xbox, it ran, I mean, countless laptops and, what am I looking for? iPads, right? But why you bring your big screen to the jazz game, I don't know. But, I mean, that's what we got. And all of it was stolen from patrons of the jazz who were coming there and leaving these things in their car. Where am I at? Please. I'm kind of subject to who they're passing the mic to.
And I was going to tell you, if you're okay, we will go until about 5 after 8, so we have a chance to let you continue to ask your questions. Thanks.
I'm Tom Nickskowski, and ever since 9/11, my wife and I have invited everybody in our block to a neighborhood party. We buy hot dogs and other stuff, ask them to bring some food, and we bring the police. Chief Burbank's been there a number of times. The bike officers will be there, and so we'll talk to them about different problems. And it's cut crime down in our block quite a bit until yesterday when my neighbor came over and said that somebody during that windstorm, Tuesday in the middle of the afternoon, stole the big screen TV and the DVDs right out of their home. That's the first one we've had in a long time. Our stake president, who's about a block and a half from that, had his car stolen. He has a wife and 4 little kids, so it was tough. I don't know if you realize how many cars get stolen every month. Is it somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 or so?
Not quite that many, but it's pretty close.
But it's a lot. And just don't leave anything in them. Don't leave the car running and go in the house or anywhere else. I worked at Rowland Hall St. Mark's School for 25 years. We average 2 to 3 cars stolen every year, and normally it would be during a snowstorm. That's when people would do it.
And a lot of those cars show up, a lot of them are now being shipped out of the country because there's a second-hand market. And a lot of them, if you happen to own an older model Honda, I'm sorry. Odds are pretty good that somebody's going to try and steal your car. They use them for parts for street racers and those types of things, and they're very easy to get into and to steal. Now, Honda's improved that and taken away that, so if you have a newer Honda, you don't need to worry about it as much. But there was a period of time, and so they are a very hot commodity, and they are being shipped out of the country really quickly in some cases. Let's see. Go ahead, please.
Chief, I just want to say, we recently resurrected our Neighborhood Watch program. Comment about that is, unfortunately, we found there's still a lot of apathy. I think a lot of people are concerned about being informants on their neighbors, so to speak, but it does help tremendously. There's an app that your officer told us about called Nextdoor. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Absolutely.
Got a message just the other day about a pair of kids that were stealing mail out of mailboxes, and within an hour or two, they caught them, which is something I wish we would address here.
So there is a new program, and we are trying to push it out to more and more people, and it's where you can basically be in touch with us and share information so that you get the updates on these. Not with the idea of everyone being paranoid, but I'm convinced, right? I'm absolutely convinced, if you care for the two neighbors on either side of you and so on down the line, you're going to have very few problems. I am amazed how many calls we get where we show up and somebody says, yeah, they took the TV, and you walk around and you ask the neighbors and they say, yeah, I saw this van pull up, wondered what they were doing, didn't know who they were. There are cases, and it sounds facetious, but it is absolutely true, where the neighbors have come across and helped the burglars unload the furniture into the van so they can get away. Very well intended, but if you don't know your neighbors, nobody, right? I don't care what police officer, how knowledgeable they are, knows your neighborhood like you do. What is normal for your neighborhood? Right? If I look down the street and I see 10 kids running around in the street, I don't have any idea if they live there, if that's a regular occurrence, if that's something really unusual. But no, and I'm going to date myself, they're playing kick the can, right? I don't even know if they play that anymore. But, right, I was the terror of my neighborhood. Not in a bad way, but I was in everyone's bad. We were always playing, right? And so you know that that's normal. I don't know that that's normal. And when it's not normal, if you don't tell me about it, I don't know that I need to pay more attention to it. Right? Those are the types of things that, again, if we would be a little more accountable for what takes place, if everyone would be a little more accountable for themselves and their children, right? Reduce our risk a little bit, not paranoid, but just reduce our risk a little bit, we would be much better off. But it is very difficult, and you do get a lot of apathy. Let's see, where are we going? Okay.
I have for years told my neighbors that not to call 911, but to call 799-3000. Is that still a preferred thing to do? We had break-ins and stuff in our neighborhood last week. I actually live in District 6. I live north of 24 South. But we contact each other a lot. And a couple of my neighbors at church said that their cars were broken into, which is typical crime. And I told them the time it usually happens and all that stuff. And they hadn't called the police yet. And I did tell them, I said, you do need to do this because it will be tracked. Another place to find out what's going on is, like Lisa said at the community council meeting, this is discussed every month. But is 799-3000 still the contact number people should call?
Okay, so let me first off, I'll start by saying yes, and then I'll tell you a little pet peeve that just makes me crazy. The state of Utah put all over the signs on the freeway, if you're involved in an accident and you can move the car, pull off to the end of the road or off the on-ramp and call 911. No, don't call 911. If you can drive your car off the freeway, that's not an emergency. Right, so call 3000 and we will get you some help there. That is the non-emergency number. Anything that is, if it's an in-progress sort of thing, if you feel your safety is in danger, if you just gotta let us know because it is an event happening right now, 911 is appropriate. Otherwise, don't.
What's the other number?
799-3000 is the non-emergency number. And it's a dispatch office, yeah. And so that 911, and it just is the way the system prioritizes calls for service. If everybody calls 911, right, there's only so many dispatchers in there that can answer the phone. And it won't hang up on you. I mean, the way the system's all set up, it'll record that you're calling, all those types of things, but it creates a longer queue. So if the non-emergency ones, they'll come on and you'll get the voice message, you know, this is emergency, dial 911, push this button or whatever it is. Otherwise, wait, and we'll get somebody on the phone eventually. But the challenge that we have is people will call 911 and want to talk to me. Right? I'm never an emergency. I don't work for a living. I have lots of good people that work for a living and do the hard work, right? So those are the types of things that we need to be concerned about. Let me go back here and then you'll, please.
Well, I live in the Fairmont neighborhood, and I just want to comment on the trolley. It seems like a lot of nefarious people ride the rails there, and they get dropped off in my neighborhood, and we feel like it's increased a lot of the crime in our area. One of the news outlets said that crime in the 84106 had gone up almost 50%. I guess you have statistics on your website that they mined. So that's concerning. And then my last thing is we were burglarized. It was traumatic. She had an incident at her house, but we did create a flyer and we let all the neighbors know about the texting app and, you know, those kind of points and tricks to kind of that whole you can't be everywhere, help each other out. But is there anything being done about that trolley? Because it's terrible.
Maybe Lisa will jump in on the trolley here at the end, right? Let me just say that one of the things that I think is, again, it's the game we play with statistics, right? So if I look at the month of April, and I say, well, the first 3 days, right? It's like college basketball. The first 3 days, we had 10 burglaries. Well, the 3 days before that, we had none. Well, it's out of control. But when you spread that out over time, I love the statistics on the basketball game. They're 0 for 8 in the last 30 seconds. Well, does that really mean anything? Because for the game, they're up. Right? But we love statistics. We love to throw these things out. And so it is irresponsible, right? Get on our webpage. You can search it yourself. You can see what goes on your neighborhood. Sign up for the app, right? And you can see what goes on in your neighborhood. And you can see the time frame that it took place. And then you can determine for yourself whether that is a concern to you or not. Now, again, that's not dismissing my responsibility, but it's very challenging to look. So, you know, if I look at statistics and say, all right, I want to pull up so many statistics, and if I include 1 month, you throw July in the year, crime goes through the roof, right? Because July is a busy month for us. Well, if you run your statistics from the end of July to the end of June, well, then we avoid all that, and it looks really great. Or if you want to make it bad, you just run it for July. And so those are the challenges that you have with statistics. And so I won't say that it hasn't gone up in your area. I don't know specifically, and I'm happy to look at it. And in fact, Lisa is my executive officer. She'll address some of that, and we'll pass that on to people and have a look at it. Absolutely, transportation, the challenge you have with transportation is it allows everybody, I mean, that's the beauty of transportation, to flow from neighborhood to neighborhood and everywhere else. And so the Sugar House area is drawing some people, some individuals who are panhandling and causing some problems. There's no question about it. So it's something that we're looking at and addressing, but I don't know, I mean, it's very hard to say more riders are committed to crime than otherwise. Let's see, where'd the microphone get, and we'll...
So are there any, like, apps that we can do to help, I guess, report emergencies that aren't really emergencies that are phone or text or something?
Well, so that's a little bit of the challenge right now. We are not quite there as far as 911 goes to receive texts and emergencies. So I'm always hesitant at this point to refer anybody to text the police department. Now, absolutely non-emergency things, you know, you want to let us know what's going on, no problem. But right now, if you want to report a crime, specifically, you should be calling at this point. Now, in the not too distant future, we will be able to receive some of those, but the technology just hasn't gotten there yet.
Chief, do you want to say what the app is again? It's called Nextdoor.
And remind me, is it Nextdoor?
It is Nextdoor.
Okay, so, but simply that. So it's Nextdoor, and there's a connection to that on our webpage. If you get on, you can do a little look there. I don't know where they... Go ahead. You've had your hand up.
I just wondered if you had any suggestions for implementing a neighborhood watch.
So Neighborhood Watch is a challenge, because it takes all kinds of different forms depending on your neighborhood and how big is it and how much you drive around. So what I recommend for Neighborhood Watch is just as I said before, get with the neighbors and say, hey, let's get together and just at least know one another and have some discussion, figure out who the neighbors are that you can trust, right? And then if you have a wider spread problem, you can start to look at, all right, can we get together and the police department will support you and, you know, do a more extensive sort of thing. But I think it starts with getting the people on your block together and saying, let's have a discussion. Where are the problems? What are the issues that we're addressing? How, you know, what are our concerns? And then happy to support that even. I mean, we'll send officers by. I'm happy to come speak at those events or participate in them. So that's where it starts, right? And then you start to expand out from there as you get the community interest. It's very hard to throw down and say, okay, I want to do a neighborhood watch 4 nights a week, that patrols a 20-block area and all those types of things. That becomes a little more challenging.
Chief,
Oh.
once you get your folks together, that, people that are interested, if you'll call our public relations office, and let me just tell you, anything you need that you don't need a cop right now, you need to get neighborhood watch, or you need to get a case number or whatever, that number is 799-3100, and in this case, just ask for the public relations office.
That's just the business number for the city.
We're going to take, you have a question. Mary, did you have a question?
Comment.
A comment. Where's that mic? And okay, well, Libby, let's take it back there, and then we'll finish up with 1, 2, 3. Is that okay? All right, thank you. I'd stay here all night, but Highland would like us to leave. So.
I was just thinking, we got burglarized a few years ago, and when the policeman came and I told him the story, he said, the problem with you people here is you're not suspicious enough. He said if you'd lived somewhere else, we would have had 3 or 4 calls after I told him my story. And I thought about that since then, because when I told people what happened, they kept saying, oh, I would have just thought it was my kids or my neighbors or yada, yada, yada. I thought about that, but we just don't assume something's out of the ordinary. And maybe we should think twice and be maybe a little more suspicious, not to a negative degree, but I certainly could have been a little more, and I've been a little more since then. Get a license plate, it doesn't hurt, to do that. I thought that was funny, I was just commenting.
Hopefully it was a little more empathetic than that. But that is a big issue. In fact, for a while, we had a number of Highland High students who would slough school and go commit residential burglaries in the area. And so it happens. And again, it goes back to that same, nobody knows your neighborhood more than you do, right? Are they people, they're kids that live in the neighborhood, right? Do they belong there?
So I was going to say, our neighborhood watch group is primarily done online. We aren't out patrolling, but we are just saying watch your own streets and then connecting online like the Nextdoor and our Facebook group so that we can share with each other more than just our street, saying what's happening a couple blocks over. Is there a common thread here happening that we can watch for and warn each other? And then we also check with the crimes.com online. Is that what it's called, crime.com? And you can type in your zip code and it shows you all the crimes that you guys are reporting. Every day it shows you updates on what's happening, so you can kind of track the whole area and see what's common. And then there's also reporting graffiti. There's been a lot of graffiti up in the Highland High area here. I've reported some, and so staying on top of that I think helps. My 2 questions are, can you tell us where the criminals are coming from? Are they our neighbors, or are they coming from other places? And my second question is, again, can you list the most prevalent crimes? You started to at the beginning, but did not really get through the list. So.
Okay. So, very good as far as sharing with your neighbors. One of the things, we don't recommend you go out and get involved in the middle of somebody who you think is committing a crime necessarily. But if you turn on your light in the middle of the night, that lets people know you're watching. You take your cell phone and take the video, take the picture, whatever it is, call. I mean, there's lots of things that you can do actively to prevent or let somebody know, hey, somebody's watching. You can honk your horn, there's, depending on just what the circumstances are, let yourself be known that you're watching, because if you're committing crimes, you don't want to be watched. So, most prevalent crimes in the area are still those open garage residential burglaries, right? By far the number 1. Stolen cars, right? Yeah, and again, the majority of stolen cars are those that are left running or with keys in them. I mean, that is a tremendous risk that you're taking, and is one that you just have to evaluate. The other one, I mean, when you look at some of the panhandling issues that we've got in and around the area, let me just say this about panhandling. The people who stand on 13th and the freeway there, they make lots of money. We invite them to be there. If nobody gave them money, they wouldn't be there. In fact, they take shifts. They use the same signs. I don't know if you sit and watch them. Right, you come in and the next shift comes in and there's the nice guy who sweeps up while he's out there and he swings his hips a little bit as he's doing it. And he gets lots of money. You sit and watch him. He gets 20s, he gets 5s, he gets all sorts of things. Right? Now, I don't even know if he's homeless, right? If he's a drug or alcohol addict, if he has a place to go, if he makes $50,000 a year, I couldn't tell you. But I'll tell you what, whatever money he's getting would be better spent on the Road Home, Catholic Community Service, or one of 25 other agencies in town that provide for the homeless and make sure that they're legitimately people in need.
Can I jump in?
Yes,
for a
you
minute?
may.
Tonight, if you want, when you leave, we have these cards that say, give a hand up, not a handout. And I now keep these in my purse and I give them to panhandlers. And what I have determined to sort of flush out the real need from the not so real is I'll say, you know what? I'll dial this number right now with my cell phone and get you the help you need. On the back of it, it says if you need clothing, dental care, food, housing assistance, obtaining ID, medical assistance, shelter, or work, call this number. And the minute I offer to make that phone call, suddenly they don't want my money. They leave. Or if it is someone who is for real, they say, really, will they help me? And so feel free to take those. We have them up here. And because it is a problem in our community, this immediate community. And the chief is absolutely right. If we weren't giving to them, they wouldn't be there. Let's finish up with the last few questions. Yes. I know you've got one and you've got one, right?
So,
I'll say it and I'll repeat it.
pretty much if I leave my car unlocked, it's guaranteed to be rummaged through. But where my concern lies is I feel like crime is becoming a little more serious. There was a homicide on this one street over where two young kids shot each other. There was then a stabbing just a little bit further down Highland. Those serious crimes are what's most concerning. What's being done, what can be done? Should we expect to see more of this?
No, because the nice thing is violent crime in the city is down, and the homicides are down significantly. Now, homicide is one of those crimes that if anyone in this room has got a great way to prevent homicides from occurring, they're a very personal crime, and they happen like that in most circumstances, and they're usually involved in emotions, drugs, and alcohol, and so it is very hard to predict and to prevent because they happen in all communities, right? And so thankfully there's not a lot that occur. Well, one of the things that's indicators of problems is when you have a lot of gang-related homicides and shootings and those things, and we don't have those in the city for the most. I mean, we do have a few every once in a while, but for the most part, we don't have them like we did in the 90s and some of those things. So those are not crimes that we're saying, okay, we're worried that another homicide is going to occur because of these circumstances, right? They're not necessarily gang-related crimes. They're not necessarily crimes that are specific. The nice thing is, in Salt Lake City, very few crimes are committed against strangers, right? It just doesn't happen that often. Now, violent crime. When you talk about burglaries and car prowls and some of those other things, now you're not guaranteed if you leave your car open that someone's going to rummage through it. But, I mean, it happens. It happens, and it depends where you live. And if you live in an apartment complex, a lot of people are coming and going all the time, your chances increase a little bit. If you live in a residential area and you leave your car parked out on the street, chances increase a little bit. If you've got a driveway, use your driveway. If you've got a garage, use your garage. I mean, those are the types of steps that you take to prevent. Now, it's not always convenient, not always have garages and everything else, so we expose ourselves to a little bit that is very difficult. So what we constantly do, and what is described by the neighborhood, watch and see what goes on in the neighborhood over time. Right? How does it come and go? We had an extremely violent crime in Fairmount Park a number of years ago. Right? That was just circumstantial because the actors happened to be there at the time. No real connection to the park or anyone that you would say, boy, that park is dangerous. It just happened to occur because of the people that were drawn to that park at that particular night.
But don't you think with that park activity and then with that shooting that happened in that green space behind the utility building, that all kind of
No.
monitored or like?
Not one that I'm concerned with, and so I just recently moved, but until a month ago, I lived on Parkway Avenue, right there by the power station. Right? And so I was there all the time, and I would stop and ask the cops, say, hey, what are you doing in my neighborhood today? And so I'm invested in the neighborhood as well, and not to the level that I'm concerned with some of those things. I mean, I have 3 grown children that they come and go and visit and everything else, and so I'm not concerned that they're in danger. The nice thing about Salt Lake is there's nowhere in Salt Lake that I wouldn't walk, and not just because I'm a police officer. I mean, I let my kids, I don't tell them, oh, don't go here, don't go there. But when you look, right, I always tell my kids, if you feel uncomfortable, if it looks uncomfortable, those are the situations that you avoid or you contact the police. Right?
Okay, last two
last one.
questions, 1, 2.
You keep adding to these questions.
I know.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm paying to be here.
Oh, I'm good. I'm here.
Thank you for coming tonight. How much of a deterrent to home robberies is a home alarm system with a monitoring company, in your opinion?
So this falls into that category just like I described risk, right? And what your exposure to, and then what is the flip side of security. So I'm not in the alarm business, and we constantly kind of fight with the alarm system because we don't respond to alarm drops, right? We make them go out and verify, and then we'll respond to the burglaries. Now there's companies that have cameras inside and monitoring devices and everything else. So we would certainly respond to if someone's called and said, hey, we've got a customer and someone's in their house, we can hear them breaking the glass. Well, then absolutely respond to that. But the majority of them we found were false alarms, usually homeowner, misuse is a hard term, but mistakes. And so, absolutely, the sign has some potential there. Absolutely, that is a security measure. It's the big dog question. Right? If you have a big dog in your front yard and you never get burglarized, is it because you have the big dog? Or is it just you happen to be lucky? I don't know. I mean, I wish I could tell you that that's 100% guaranteed. Lights on, radio on, all these types of things that you can put in place that help you be a little safe. And I always debate this with people that I love about, right? I'm a little paranoid because I'm the police chief, right? And so I always am leaving the radio on, leaving the lights on, and then you have people who are always turning those off. Why are you leaving those things on? That's silliness. Well, you just have to measure that for yourself. So alarms fall in that same category.
Okay, final question.
Okay, I was just wondering how
Take the
safe,
mic.
I'm just wondering how safe Sugar House Park is. Is there drug activity there?
So there is nowhere in this city that there's not drug activity. Now, is it dangerous drug activity that you need to be concerned about? No. Is it people who are openly selling it? But can you see somebody? Yep. There's no question about it. If you paid enough attention and watch, somebody's going to commit some sort of drug deal. I mean, the drugs are a problem that we have. The appetite in this country is enormous. So last month alone, we seized about 75 pounds of heroin. 75 pounds. That translates into about $9 million on the street. That didn't cause the price of heroin to jump in Salt Lake City. Nor did it make it hard to come by. Now, everyone looks and says, well, yeah, you got these guys selling drugs. But you know how much money we put into drugs? And try and curtail that? As long as there's a demand, somebody's going to fill it. Because these drug cartels are like Walmart. They're making tons of money. Right? So we seize 75 pounds, $8 million. That's nothing. That doesn't impact their business. So we need to work on the demand side of this. How do we let our young people know, and everyone in our, there's risk, right? Drugs work. It's silly to say no, drugs don't work. Absolutely, they'll make you high. They have the intended consequences. That's why people use them. But the risk associated with it and what the potential consequences are significant. But why do we take that risk in our society? And that's where we need to solve the problem and stem the demand if we're ever going to address the supply, because this nation has put so much money into preventing drugs from coming into this country, and we don't even come close. And so, again, that's a big answer to your question, but I don't worry about it. I walk my dog all the time in Sugar House Park, 10-year-old with me. No, I'm not. Now this is a secret, and you don't want my executive officer to know, because she'll be very upset. Right? When I'm out running, I'm not carrying a gun. Let me just say this before we close, and then I'll hand the microphone to Moon. We enjoy in Salt Lake City, and again, it's why I stay and why I'm so committed to this community. We enjoy a level of trust and conversation that sometimes can be very, very heated, but it does not result in some of the misconduct. I have the opportunity, in fact, I was just in Ferguson, Missouri last week. I go around for the Department of Justice and look at other agencies and try and solve their problems. as a consultant for them. And so I get to see the disorder that takes place and what happens. And it is because of the ability to communicate, it's because of dialogue like this that we get together and solve problems, even when they're hard problems. We look at it. And so thank you, because your support of the police department and me personally is tremendous. And that makes us better. And we will make mistakes. That's our business. But I promise you, right, I will be held accountable for those mistakes. And we will try and do better. So thank you very much. Your support is tremendous.
Thank you so much to all of you for being here, and to Chief Burbank. I think you can see why I have enjoyed my opportunity to work with him. I think the takeaway tonight is don't be a victim of a crime of opportunity. Keep your eyes open. If you see something, call and report it. Just like they say all the time at the airport, if you see something suspicious, report it. Report it. They are not mad if you call that 799 number. Report it. That's how we get on their map. So they know there's stuff going on, and that's how we do see more police officers. Like the chief explained at the beginning. They go where the draw is. So we make sure that we let them know what's going on. And finally, if you have any questions for me, feel free to ask them. I have my business card up here. There's a bunch of other information from the city. And also, if you want to receive my District 7 email, that's a fabulous document that comes out monthly, and I can say that because the staff helps me with it. Feel free to sign up here, or you can email me at my email address that's on my card, and just in the subject line say newsletter, and we'll make sure that you get that. I was going to respond to the comment about the S-line. One of the things that I'm trying to do is to work with UTA to make sure that they have UTA police regularly there, because what is happening frequently, from what I understand, is as people are chased out of Pioneer Park, they hop on tracks, and then they come up the S-line, and they rarely are paying their fare. And then we have a liquor store in Sugar House Park. So they walk over to the liquor, or in Sugar House. They walk over across Fairmont, go to the liquor store, and they come out over and pass out in Fairmont Park. So we're trying to work with UTA to make sure that they're doing a better job of enforcing people having tickets who are on the S-line, because that is a concern that I think that we all have.
And we will put some more people in Fairmont Park in the summertime to kind of stand up.
So yeah, I understand. Thank you again. I really appreciate your coming, and we'll do this again on another topic. Thanks so much.